It's weekly download time. 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 And now we're going to learn some stuff. Oh yeah, welcome to the weekly download. It's the weekliest download around where I, ill.gates, teach you all the stuff that will make your life easier in the studio and help you make your music making more fun. And yeah, this is a real good one. Okay, this weekly download, this is something that I normally, a lot of this info is there kind of in bits and pieces throughout some of the older weekly downloads. But this stuff, like when people come here to the dojo to get trained in person, this is usually what I have to focus on getting people to understand so that they can not sound basic. Okay. So, I often would reserve this training for people who come to the dojo in person to train and stay here for a week, but no one is doing that because of COVID. This place is basically a bunker now, as I'm sure your house is as well. So I really think the best way that I can serve our community and serve the world at large is to kind of double down on the weekly download, make them as juicy as I can, share the best tips that I can. And as of this week, I've opened up viewing the live class to anyone who wants to view the live class. So if you have friends who are trying to not drive themselves slowly mad in their quarantine and, they can come now. The archive, of course, is members only, but the classes are now going to be free to watch. And I really just want people to stay inside. And, as producers, we got to tame the dynamics of that curve. There's far too much dynamic range on that virus curve. We got to compress that shit. We got to compress that shit. We got to clip the peak off of that curve, baby. All right, so welcome to all of our new people. Welcome to all of our dojo members. Let's talk about Don't Be a Basic Bitch Bootcamp. Okay, so basically, when I listen to tracks, a lot of the time, I listen to people's tracks, and there's just these telltale giveaways that they have not been doing this for very long, or that they have not, they're not listening like an experienced person listens. They're not listening for the right things, and they're also making a bunch of rookie mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to basically, I'm not sure if this will be one weekly download or two. It depends on how far we get, but I really want to explain each of these things really, really clearly. Okay. Actually, I'll go back into this mode first for a minute before we get into the notes. Okay. So the biggest giveaway for me is when it sounds like the person was afraid to be imperfect. Okay. And this kind of goes into what I was talking about 2 weeks ago when we were talking about what's beyond the recipes, what's beyond the exercises, what's beyond the EDM cookbook, what's beyond all of that, is becoming, not hiding yourself behind a mask of perfection, trying to make music to show us what you can do. Most people's music for a long time, the underlying message of the music, if there is one, is look what I can do. Aren't I clever? Right? And that's not that interesting for listeners. Listeners want to hear you be vulnerable. They want to hear you say something. They want you to tell us about yourself. Tell us about your life. Tell us about your problems. That's what makes interesting music, the drama of it, the humanity, the vulnerability, the expressiveness, okay? And most of the time when people are starting out, they're so concerned with the technical aspects of music because they're learning the interface. You know, they want to know, yeah, I did this mix down properly. I made this bass sound properly. You know, that riff is dope. You know, that transition works. You know, they're so caught up in that stuff that they're not really letting us in. They're not letting us know who they are. They're not getting their hands dirty. They're not getting the sounds dirty. They're not, they're not messing things up. And everything's on the grid. All the tuning of everything is perfect. There's not any sounds that are serving as the centerpiece of the song. You know, it's really just kind of like a bunch of commercial presets and a bunch of kicks and snares and stuff that they downloaded off the internet. And you're basically just saying, hey, look at all these sounds that I collected that other people made, and I put them into one place, and I didn't make any mistakes, tie a ribbon around me, you know, and nobody fucking cares. That sounds basic. Okay. So, I've kind of highlighted a bunch of different things here that you can do and a bunch of different things that you can learn to listen for that are not necessarily that complicated, that will really help you to not be a basic bitch and not sound like a basic bitch. Okay. So one of the first things that is like the biggest giveaway to me is when all of the sounds sound off the shelf, and especially the drum sounds sound off the shelf. Okay. And it's kind of like, it's one of those things where it's not like a rule, like your drums can't be bought from a commercial sound library. We all use drums from commercial sound libraries. It's just making it not sound like it's from a commercial sound library, making it not feel like it's from a commercial sound library. Okay, I'm not saying you need to synthesize every single drum sound from scratch. If you want to, there are many weekly downloads about that in the sound design series. If you want to do that, that's fine. I encourage you to learn that eventually. But there's nothing wrong with using sounds that are off the shelf. You just have to make sure they don't feel off the shelf. Okay, you have to make sure they don't feel off the shelf. So what makes them feel off the shelf? Well, typically, drum sounds, if you go into any of these kind of commercial libraries, like let's look up like a cymatics kick, right? If you go to any one of these things, you will very quickly find that, you know, let's get one, let's get this one, and I'm not picking on cymatics. They're a great company. I love them. They're one of the best. I just don't want to go searching through all these libraries. But basically, you'll notice pretty much all of these things are really, really loud. They're really, really transient-y. And they are pretty much like smashed at 0 dB. Like they all have these really sharp transients. And they're all like designed basically so you don't have to do anything to them, right? They'll sound good. You can just put them in your track and they'll sound like, you know, dubstep or like whatever genre you're trying to produce. And the problem with that is that people end up not doing anything to them. And then they feel off the shelf, right? A lot of the time, too, people will be really insecure and they will want to have these like big, big drums where the kick is just like the loudest kick that's ever kicked. And the snare is like the loudest snare that's ever snared. And they have so much sustain at a temporal level. Like, look at, a lot of these are long. Like, look at this is like, you know, that's like, what is that? That is at 140, that is a 16th note in length. Yeah, these are all pretty much a 16th note long. This one's even like a little bit longer. But yeah, they're all really long, which is often unnecessary. They're often louder than you need. They often have more transients that you need. And this is because, you know, when you're synthesizing sounds, it's hard to get a sound to sound loud. It's hard to get a sound to sound full. It's hard to get a sound to sound super clean and super transient-y and super loud and super everything. So they're basically trying to do all of that for you, right? But the problem is that people will get it in there and then they'll be like, okay, well, I'm going to leave the sound design to the sound designer people. And I'm just like, sound design is hard. I should leave it to the professionals. I don't want to make it imperfect. And then they just end up like not touching it much or not changing it. Or another thing that they'll do is get really insecure, and they'll take these already compressed kicks and stuff, and they'll go put more compression on them. Okay, so let's take this glue compressor. I'll put it on there, and let's just, I'm going to load up another audio track, and I'll show you what happens when you compress already compressed things. Okay, so let's put the glue compressor on. I'm going to put the threshold down a lot. I'm going to put the ratio up a lot, and then the attack and release down, because that's normally what people do when they don't know what they're doing, and they get this. Right? And then they'll turn that up. But the thing is, this, even when you turn it up, is not going to be any louder. It's not going to be any louder than this. Right? When it's turned up to 0, it's not any louder. And that's because these kicks, they have no dynamic range already. They're already right at 0 the whole time. So the only thing that's happening when you're compressing them is you're adding compressor distortion. Okay, so that's a real dead giveaway when you have store-bought drum sounds that have no processing on them to improve them and only lots of compression, which ruins them. So some things that you can do to improve sounds from a commercial library. If you want more transient, you want to actually increase the dynamic range, turn the attack up on your compressor, and then you get, actually here, let's get those things back there. Yes, if you turn open up the compressor a little bit, open up the attack time on the compressor rather, then the longer attack time will create some dynamic range, and it will create some, and then the release gets rid of the compressor distortion because that fluttering is from the release, but the longer attack will give you more dynamics. So watch. Right? So now you can see that 30 milliseconds of attack time. So I'll sometimes do this to commercial sounds to get them to have more transient, so that there's a bigger difference between the initial attack phase of the sound and the rest of the sound. And then later, when you compress it at the group stage or whatever, this will sound a lot better when compressed than this will, because if you're compressing a sound that has no dynamic range, all you're doing is distorting it. Whereas if you add dynamic range to the sound and then compress it later, you'll be able to compress that sound without distorting it. Okay, so that's one thing you can do. Another thing that you can do is the snares. People are always putting these like super loud snares that you don't really need super loud snares. A lot of the best tracks have really shitty sounding drums, like really tiny little snares, snares that are pitched up, snares that are short, snares that are dirty, like some of the best drum beats ever. Let's listen to like Closer by 9 Inch Nails. And like, listen to how these drums, you would never pick these drums on a sample archive. You would never pick these drums. But these drums sound fucking great because they sound cheap, because they sound shitty, because they don't sound like they're off the shelf. These sound like really personal, Like those drums sound great. Or let's listen to some Ivy Lab, right? Let's check out like Ivy Lab Orange, right? And like listen to these drums, Right? So those ones, you can hear there's not a lot of power in that sound. There's not a lot of, that's not this big full frequency long dubstep snare, it's like this tiny little crunchy like and that's why it works is because it's not big, it's not loud, it doesn't have a huge transient, it's processed, it's dirty, it's thin, right?